The first time I met Mrs. Alina Whittaker, I thought she was the strangest woman I had ever seen. And now, 3 years later, sitting alone in the quiet living room of my small apartment in Portland, with the rain tapping softly against the window and a cup of tea slowly growing cold in my hands, I realized something that still makes my chest ache in the most beautiful way. Meeting her saved my life. If you had told 24-year-old me that my closest friend would be an 82-year-old woman who wore purple slippers, baked cinnamon cookies at midnight, and talked to her garden like it could hear her, I would have laughed. Back then, I believed friendships had rules. Friends were supposed to be your age. They were supposed to go to bars with you, send memes at midnight, and complain about work together. They weren't supposed to be old enough to remember life before the internet. But life has a strange way of ignoring the rules we think exist. And the story of how Alina Whittaker walked into my lonely, complicated, messy little world is something I still think about almost every day. Because sometimes the people who change us the most are the ones we never expected to meet. 3 years ago, my life looked nothing like it does now. I was 21. I had just moved to Portland after graduating from college in California, convinced that the city's rainy skies and cozy coffee shops would somehow help me figure out who I was supposed to be. Instead, I spent most nights sitting on the floor of my tiny studio apartment, eating instant noodles and wondering why adulthood felt so heavy. My name is Lily Morgan, by the way. And at that time in my life, I felt completely, painfully alone. My parents had divorced the year before. My dad had moved to Arizona with his new girlfriend. My mom stayed in San Diego, but worked 2 jobs and rarely had time to talk. My college friends were scattered across the country, chasing careers and dreams. Meanwhile, I had taken a job as a receptionist at a small dental clinic just to pay rent. Every morning looked the same. Wake up, drink coffee, ride the bus through gray streets, answer phones, smile politely, go home, repeat. The loneliness didn't come all at once. It crept in quietly, like fog, until one day I realized entire weeks had passed where the longest conversation I'd had with anyone was ordering coffee. That winter was especially hard. Portland rain doesn't fall like normal rain. It lingers, soft, endless gray. And when you're lonely, gray skies feel heavier. One evening after work, I was walking home through my neighborhood when I noticed something unusual. An elderly woman was standing in the middle of the sidewalk, arguing with a bush. Yes, a bush. She was wearing a long blue coat, bright purple slippers, and thick glasses that kept sliding down her nose. Her silver hair was tied up in a messy bun, and she was pointing at a rose bush like it had personally offended her. "You're not supposed to bloom in February," she said firmly. I slowed down, unsure whether to laugh or be concerned. She sighed dramatically. "Well, if you insist on being rebellious, at least try to look pretty while doing it." I couldn't help it. I laughed, not loudly, but enough that she turned around. Her eyes squinted at me for a moment. Then, to my surprise, she smiled. "You must be new here," she said. I blinked. "How did you know?" "Because everyone who lives here already knows my roses, and I argue sometimes." I laughed again. That was the moment I met Alina Whittaker. Alina lived in the little blue house at the corner of Maple Street. You know the kind. White wooden porch, wind chimes that sang whenever the breeze moved, flower boxes under every window. It looked like something out of an old movie. At first, our conversations were small, short chats when I passed by after work. She would be watering plants or trimming roses. Sometimes she offered me cookies. Sometimes she complained about squirrels stealing tomatoes. I never stayed long, but somehow those tiny moments started becoming the best part of my day. One evening, she asked a question that caught me off guard. "Do you have family here, Lily?" "No," I said quietly. "Friends?" "Not really." She nodded slowly like she understood more than I had said. "Well," she said, adjusting her glasses, "that sounds like a problem we should fix." I laughed, but she was serious. "Come over for tea tomorrow evening," she said. 6 o'clock. I hesitated. Accepting invitations from strangers isn't exactly normal, but something about her felt safe. Warm, like the kind of person who had spent a lifetime caring about others. So the next evening, I knocked on the door of the blue house. And that's when everything started changing. Alina's house smelled like cinnamon and old books. Every wall was covered in photographs. Some were black and white, others faded with time. There were pictures of weddings, children, beaches, birthdays, an entire lifetime displayed in frames. She handed me a cup of tea and a plate of cookies. I hope you like cinnamon. I love cinnamon. We sat at a small wooden table near the window while rain tapped against the glass. At first, we talked about simple things: work, weather, her garden. But Alina had a gift for asking questions that reach deeper. What scares you the most about the future? She asked suddenly. I nearly choked on my tea. People don't usually ask that. Well, she said calmly, people usually ask boring questions. I stared at my cup. Then, without planning to, I told her the truth. I'm scared I'm going to live my whole life feeling like this. Like what? Like I don't belong anywhere. She didn't interrupt, didn't rush to give advice. She just listened. And somehow that simple kindness made my eyes sting. After a moment, she said something I'll never forget. Loneliness isn't a permanent condition. Lily, sometimes it's just the space life creates before something beautiful arrives. At the time, I didn't believe her. But she was right. Over the next few months, Alina and I developed a routine. Every Tuesday evening, I visited the Blue House. We drank tea, baked cookies, talked about everything. She told stories about growing up in the 1950s, about falling in love with her husband, Daniel, about raising 2 children who now lived far away. I told her about my messy dreams, my fears, my confusion about adulthood. Sometimes we laughed so hard I cried. Sometimes we talked quietly for hours. And sometimes, we simply sat on the porch watching rain fall on the roses. Neighbors started noticing. One afternoon, a woman walking her dog smiled at me. You must be Alina's new granddaughter. I started to correct her, but Alina simply winked and said something like that. And honestly, it felt nice. One autumn afternoon, I arrived at the Blue House and noticed something strange. The garden looked messy. Leaves covered the porch. And Alina didn't answer the door. A small knot of worry formed in my chest. I knocked again. Still nothing. Finally, after a moment, the door slowly opened. Alina stood there, looking smaller than usual. Her smile was tired. Sorry, dear, she said softly. I'm a little slow today. That was the first time I realized something important. I thought Alina had been helping me heal my loneliness. But she needed someone too. Her children lived thousands of miles away. Her husband had passed away 10 years earlier. Most of her old friends were gone. In her quiet Blue House, she had been lonely too. And somehow our lives had collided at exactly the moment we both needed it most. Alina taught me things no one else ever had. Not big lessons, small ones. She taught me how to bake real apple pie, how to grow tomatoes, how to slow down and notice sunsets. But more than anything, she taught me something about people. Age doesn't separate hearts, she once said while trimming roses. Fear does. She told me friendships aren't about similarity. They're about kindness and trust and showing up for someone. One winter evening, nearly 2 years after we met, Alina and I sat on her porch, wrapped in blankets watching snowfall. She was quieter than usual. After a long silence, she looked at me gently. Lily, she said, promise me something. What? Promise me that when life gets hard again, you won't try to face it alone. I smiled. I won't. She nodded, satisfied. Then she added something that still echoes in my mind. You know, when I first saw you walking down that sidewalk 3 years ago, you looked like someone carrying the world on her shoulders. I laughed softly. I probably was. Yes, she said, but you're not anymore. 6 months later, I received a phone call from Alina's daughter. Alina had passed away peacefully in her sleep. I remember sitting on my apartment floor holding the phone, unable to speak. The world suddenly felt quiet in a way I had never experienced before. For days, I walked past the Blue House, expecting to see her in the garden, arguing with roses, wearing purple slippers, smiling. But the porch was empty. The wind chimes still moved in the breeze. But Alina Whitaker was gone. 2 weeks after the funeral, a small envelope arrived in my mailbox. It was addressed in Alina's handwriting. Inside was a short letter and a photograph of the two of us laughing on her porch. The letter said, Dear Lily, if you're reading this, it means I've gone somewhere peaceful. Please don't be sad for too long. I lived a very full life. But the last few years were extra special because of you. You walked into my garden one rainy afternoon and reminded me that friendship has no age limit. You helped an old woman feel young again. And I hope I helped a young woman realize she was never truly alone. So whenever life feels heavy, remember the roses. They bloom in strange seasons sometimes. Just like friendships. Love always. Alina. And that's why tonight, sitting here in my quiet apartment at 24 years old, listening to the rain fall outside my window, I'm smiling. Because somewhere in the city, there's still a little blue house on Maple Street. And every spring the rose bush in front blooms early, just like Alina used to complain about. And every time I walk past it, I remember something she once told me. The most beautiful friendships are the ones you never see coming. She was right, because the strangest woman I ever met became the most important friend I ever had.